大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。今天我们要说一个用数字改变世界的女性。她出身英国上流家庭，本来应该过着茶会和舞会的生活，她却选择了一条当时被认为最不体面的路，去照顾病人。她叫弗罗伦斯南丁格尔 Florence Nightingale， 现代护理学的奠基者。她最有名的形象是战地医院里提着油灯巡房的女性，但她真正改变世界的武器，其实是一张她自己画出来的图表。今天我们就从头说起，说说这个把数据当成武器的女人，怎么用统计图表说服了整个帝国。南丁格尔1820年出生地点是意大利的佛罗伦斯，她的名字就是取自这座城市。家里非常富裕，父亲拥有多处庄园。南丁格尔从小接受顶尖的私人教育，精通多国语言，数学也学得特别好。按照当时英国上流社会的期待，像她这样家世的女孩，应该把心思放在婚姻和社交上。但南丁格尔从小就对这种生活感到格格不入。1837年，南丁格尔17岁。他后来在日记里记录了一件事，他说在那一年，他感觉到一种召唤，一种要他去服侍的召唤。他当时还不确定这个召唤具体要他做什么，但这个经验让他相信，自己的人生一定不只是嫁人生子。几年之后，他慢慢确定了自己的方向，他想成为一名护士。这个想法让他的家人非常震惊。在维多利亚时代的英国，护士这个职业社会地位很低，从事这份工作的人往往被认为缺乏教养，甚至跟酗酒和不良行为联想在一起。南丁格尔的母亲和姐姐强烈反对，觉得这会让整个家族蒙羞，但南丁格尔态度非常坚定，他花了好几年时间说服家人。1850年，他终于获得机会前往德国的凯撒斯维特接受护理训练，那是一个由基督教会设立的护理机构，训练内容严谨扎实。南丁格尔在那里学到了系统化的照护方法，也亲眼见识到良好的卫生管理可以大幅降低病患的死亡率。1853年，他回到伦敦，担任一间淑女医疗机构的监督，负责管理和改善机构内的护理制度。他在这个职位上表现出色，展现出过人的组织与行政能力。1854年，克里米亚战争爆发，英国军队在战场上死伤惨重。当时的新闻记者深入前线报道，揭露了一个让英国社会震惊的事实：军队里因为战斗死亡的士兵人数远远低于因为疾病和不卫生环境而死亡的人数。战地医院拥挤肮脏，伤患躺在满是排泄物和害虫的环境里，缺乏干净的水，缺乏基本的医疗物资。士兵死于霍乱和伤寒的人数远超过死于战场上的人数。英国政府受到舆论强大的压力，一位南丁格尔多年好友，时任战争大臣的官员邀请他率领一支护理团队前往前线。1854年10月，南丁格尔带住38名护士启程前往土耳其斯库塔里的军队医院。他抵达的时候，眼前的景象令他震惊。医院走廊堆满了伤患，病床之间几乎没有走动的空间，排水系统严重堵塞，老鼠在病房里到处窜动。南丁格尔立刻展开大规模的整顿工作，他要求彻底清洁医院环境，改善通风，建立干净的供水系统，规范食物和药品的分配流程。他还做了一件当时很少人做的事，他每天晚上会亲自提着油灯，巡视所有的病房，确认每一位伤患的状况。士兵们对他的形象印象深刻，开始称呼她为提灯女士。在南丁格尔接手管理的头几个月里，医院的死亡率出现了戏剧性的下降，从原本超过40%的死亡率， 降到不到3%。战争结束之后，南丁格尔回到英国，受到民众的热烈欢迎，但他并没有满足于已经取得的成就，他开始思考一个更深层的问题：如何让政府和军方真正理解卫生条件对死亡率的决定性影响，而不只是靠他个人的亲身经历去说服别人。他决定用数据说话。南丁格尔花了大量时间整理克里米亚战争期间的死亡统计数字。他发现一个惊人的事实：士兵因为疾病死亡的人数是因为战斗死亡人数的好几倍。但这些数字如果只是列成表格，很难让不熟悉统计的官员和议员理解其中的严重性。于是，南丁格尔发明了一种全新的图表形式，后来被称为玫瑰图，或者极坐标面积图。这种图表用不同颜色的扇形区块，呈现每个月因为不同原因死亡的士兵人数，一眼就能看出，可预防的疾病死亡远远超过战斗造成的死亡。这张图表视觉效果强烈，即使完全不懂统计学的人，也能立刻理解问题的严重性。南丁格尔把这份报告呈交给英国政府，甚至亲自向维多利亚女王说明。他的图表最终促成了军队医疗体系的全面改革。他的统计贡献后来获得学界的正式肯定。1859年，她成为英国皇家统计学会第一位女性会员。除了统计改革，南丁格尔也致力于让护理成为一门正式的专业。1860年，她在伦敦圣多玛医院创立了南丁格尔护理学校，这是世界上第一所有系统的世俗护理训练学校。这所学校建立了完整的课程体系，包括解剖学、卫生学，还有食物照护技巧。毕业生后来被派往世界各地，建立类似的护理训练机构。南丁格尔的护理教育模式逐渐成为全球护理专业的标准范本。从克里米亚战争回来之后，南丁格尔的身体状况一直不太好，他感染了一种当时医学界还无法完全理解的慢性疾病，长期发烧、关节疼痛、极度疲劳。这个病症让他此后几十年大部分时间都只能卧床，很少能够亲自外出活动。但即使身体虚弱，南丁格尔的工作从来没有停止过。他躺在床上，持续写作，持续与各国的医疗官员通信，持续推动卫生政策改革。他参与了印度殖民地医疗卫生体系的改革工作，提出许多关于军营卫生和公共卫生的建议。他也持续关注医院建筑设计，主张病房应该保持良好的通风和采光。这些理念后来深深影响了现代医院的建筑规划。他写下的护理学笔记后来成为护理教育的重要教材。书里强调的重点不只是技术操作，更是对病人整体处境的细腻观察。南丁格尔曾经写道，护理的艺术在于把病人放在最好的状态下，让大自然本身的修复力去发挥作用。他认为护士的角色不只是执行医嘱，而是要主动观察环境、光线、空气、饮食，甚至病人的心情，这些都是影响康复速度的重要因素。1910年8月13日，南丁格尔在伦敦的家中去世，享年90岁。他生前谢绝了许多公开的荣誉仪式，按照他自己的遗愿，他的葬礼低调简朴，被安葬在家族墓地。回顾南丁格尔的一生，我们可以看到几件很重要的事。第一件事，真正的说服力往往不是靠情绪，而是靠证据。南丁格尔亲眼目睹了战地医院的惨况，但他知道光靠描述悲惨的画面无法真正推动制度性的改革。他选择把痛苦转化成数据，再把数据转化成一张任何人都能看懂的图表。第二件事，专业需要被建构出来。在南丁格尔之前，护理不被视为一门专业， 她用一套完整的训练体系，把这份工作提升成一个受人尊敬的职业，让后来无数的护理人员有了可以依循的标准。第三件事，身体的限制不代表工作的终点。南丁格尔人生后半段几乎都在病榻上度过，但他持续写作，持续通信，持续推动改革，证明了真正的影响力不需要靠站在人前才能发挥。南丁格尔曾经这样描述自己的信念，他说每一个人，无论身处什么位置，都可以为改善这个世界做一点事。他用自己的一生证明了这句话。从一个被期待嫁入豪门的贵族小姐，到一个改变全球护理体系的先驱，她走过的路提醒我们一件事：真正的行动不一定需要惊天动地的姿态，有时候，一盏灯，一张图表，就足以照亮一整个时代。我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I am Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. Today we are telling the story of a woman who changed the world using numbers. She was born into a wealthy British family and was expected to live a life of tea parties and dances. Instead, she chose a path that was considered, at the time, one of the least respectable a woman could take: caring for the sick. Her name was Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing. Her most famous image is that of a woman walking through a military hospital at night, carrying an oil lamp. But the real weapon she used to change the world was a chart she designed herself. Today we are going to start from the beginning and look at how this woman, who treated data as a weapon, used a statistical chart to persuade an entire empire. Nightingale was born in 1820 in Florence, Italy. Her name was taken directly from the city of her birth. Her family was extremely wealthy. Her father owned several estates. Nightingale received an outstanding private education from a young age, becoming fluent in multiple languages and excelling especially in mathematics. According to the expectations of upper-class British society at the time, a young woman of her background was meant to focus her attention on marriage and social life. But Nightingale felt out of step with that way of living from a very early age. In 1837, when Nightingale was 17 years old, she later recorded in her diary that she had experienced a calling that year, a calling to serve. At the time she was not yet certain exactly what this calling required of her. But this experience convinced her that her life was not meant to be only about marriage and raising children. Over the following years, she slowly clarified her direction. She wanted to become a nurse. This idea shocked her family completely. In Victorian-era Britain, nursing carried very low social status. Women who took up this work were often assumed to lack proper upbringing, and were sometimes associated with drunkenness and poor conduct. Nightingale's mother and sister strongly opposed the idea, feeling it would bring shame on the entire family. But Nightingale remained firmly committed. It took her several years to convince her family. In 1850 she finally gained the opportunity to travel to Kaiserswerth in Germany to receive formal nursing training. This was a religious institution that trained nurses under strict, thorough standards. Nightingale learned systematic methods of patient care there, and saw firsthand how proper hygiene management could dramatically reduce mortality rates among patients. In 1853 she returned to London to serve as superintendent of an institution for the medical care of gentlewomen. She was responsible for managing and improving the nursing systems within the institution, and she performed exceptionally well in this role, demonstrating remarkable organizational and administrative ability. In 1854, the Crimean War broke out. British forces suffered enormous casualties on the battlefield. Journalists reporting from the front lines exposed a fact that shocked British society. The number of soldiers dying from disease and unsanitary conditions vastly exceeded the number dying in actual combat. Military hospitals were overcrowded and filthy. Wounded soldiers lay in conditions filled with waste and vermin, without access to clean water or basic medical supplies. Far more soldiers died from cholera and typhoid than died on the battlefield itself. The British government came under intense public pressure. A longtime friend of Nightingale's, who at the time served as secretary at war, invited her to lead a team of nurses to the front. In October 1854, Nightingale set out with 38 nurses for the military hospital at Scutari in what is now Turkey. When she arrived, the scene shocked her. The hospital corridors were packed with wounded soldiers. There was almost no room to move between the beds. The drainage system was severely clogged, and rats scurried freely through the wards. Nightingale immediately began an enormous cleanup and reorganization effort. She demanded a thorough cleaning of the hospital environment, improved ventilation, established a clean water supply system, and set up proper procedures for distributing food and medicine. She also did something very few people did at the time. Every night, she personally carried an oil lamp and walked through every single ward, checking on the condition of each wounded soldier. The soldiers were deeply moved by her presence, and began calling her the lady with the lamp. Within the first few months after Nightingale took charge, the hospital's death rate dropped dramatically, falling from more than 40% to under 3%. After the war ended, Nightingale returned to Britain and was welcomed enthusiastically by the public. But she was not satisfied with what had already been achieved. She began thinking about a deeper question. How could she make the government and the military genuinely understand the decisive impact of sanitary conditions on mortality, rather than relying only on her own personal testimony to persuade people? She decided to let the data speak for itself. Nightingale spent an enormous amount of time compiling mortality statistics from the Crimean War. She discovered a startling fact. The number of soldiers who died from disease was many times higher than the number who died in combat. But if these numbers were simply presented as tables, it would be difficult for officials and members of parliament unfamiliar with statistics to grasp the severity of the situation. So Nightingale invented an entirely new form of chart, later known as the Rose diagram, or the polar area diagram. This chart used colored wedge-shaped sections to represent the number of soldiers who died each month from different causes. At a single glance, it became clear that deaths from preventable disease far outnumbered deaths caused directly by combat. This chart had a powerful visual impact. Even someone with no background in statistics whatsoever could immediately understand the seriousness of the problem. Nightingale submitted this report to the British government and personally presented her findings to Queen Victoria. Her chart ultimately helped drive a complete overhaul of the military medical system. Her contribution to statistics later received formal recognition from academia. In 1859, she became the first female member of the Royal Statistical Society. Beyond her statistical reforms, Nightingale also devoted herself to establishing nursing as a formal profession. In 1860, she founded the Nightingale Training School at St. Thomas Hospital in London. This was the world's first systematic, secular school for training nurses. The school established a complete curriculum, including anatomy, hygiene, and practical caregiving skills. Its graduates were later sent around the world to establish similar nurse training institutions. Nightingale's model of nursing education gradually became the global standard for the nursing profession. After returning from the Crimean War, Nightingale's health remained poor for the rest of her life. She had contracted a chronic illness that the medical community at the time did not fully understand, causing prolonged fever, joint pain, and extreme fatigue. This condition meant that for the following decades of her life, she spent most of her time confined to bed, rarely able to go out in person. But even in this weakened state, Nightingale's work never stopped. She lay in bed, continuing to write, continuing to correspond with medical officials from countries around the world, and continuing to push for public health reforms. She took part in reforming the medical and sanitary systems of colonial India, offering extensive recommendations on military camp hygiene and public health. She also remained deeply engaged with hospital architecture, arguing that hospital wards should be designed with proper ventilation and natural light. These ideas would go on to deeply influence the architectural planning of modern hospitals. Her written notes on nursing later became a foundational text in nursing education. The emphasis in her writing was never only on technical procedure, but on the careful, attentive observation of a patient's entire situation. Nightingale once wrote that the art of nursing lay in placing the patient in the best possible condition for nature itself to do its healing work. She believed a nurse's role was not simply to carry out a doctor's instructions, but to actively observe the environment, the light, the air, the diet, and even the patient's state of mind, all of which she considered essential factors influencing the speed of recovery. On August 13, 1910, Nightingale died at her home in London. She was 90 years old. She had declined many public honors during her lifetime. In accordance with her own wishes, her funeral was quiet and modest, and she was buried in her family's burial plot. Looking back on Nightingale's life, there are several things worth reflecting on. The first is this. True persuasion often comes not from emotion, but from evidence. Nightingale personally witnessed the horrors of the military hospitals. But she understood that describing tragic scenes alone would never be enough to drive genuine institutional reform. She chose instead to translate suffering into data, and then to translate that data into a chart anyone could understand at a glance. The second is this. A profession has to be deliberately built. Before Nightingale, nursing was not regarded as a genuine profession. Through a complete system of training, she elevated this work into a respected occupation, giving countless nurses who came after her a standard to follow. The third is this. Physical limitation does not mean the end of one's work. Nightingale spent most of the second half of her life confined to bed. But she kept writing, kept corresponding, and kept pushing for reform. She proved that true influence does not require standing in front of a crowd. Nightingale once described her own conviction in this way. She said that every single person, no matter what position they hold, can do something to make the world a little better. She proved this with her own life. From a young aristocratic woman expected to marry into wealth, to a pioneer who transformed the global nursing profession. The path she walked reminds us of something important. Genuine action does not always require a dramatic gesture. Sometimes a single lamp, and a single chart, are enough to light up an entire era. See you next time.